let me just start by saying when I started to talk to a few people and saying I was doing something on the year ahead in local government and what did they think was coming, there was, I can't tell you how much there was, everyone was laughing really, really nervously. The picture is really, really dire, but everyone in local government has a huge amount of commitment and indeed optimism, and are carrying on and doing what they can to make public services work. So for the moment, I think it's fair to say there is no money. It's not just Northamptonshire. Northamptonshire has sort of embodied some of the difficulties that local government is facing. You can argue whether the authority itself was badly managed, well managed, or it was a combination of things, or whether it was just the cuts that caused the problems in Northamptonshire. That's almost, we've almost gone beyond that at the moment, because we're starting to see more local authorities starting to have to cut services very, very dramatically. I think for the moment we've got East Sussex, Somerset, Torbay are all pulling back services to a very, very basic level. I think what's going to be interesting, and I think my major prediction for the coming year, is that this will continue to happen. But what's interesting about it is that we've already started to see people judicially reviewing the decisions. So we're likely to get into a situation whereby we've got councils making cuts and the public challenging them legally, which not only causes problems to the cuts, it also causes problems to them with increased legal fees. So a really interesting situation about whether or not the public will tolerate service cuts in that way. I think what's interesting, and we're also seeing now, is that universal services are being scaled back. So anything that the vast majority of the public uses, so the libraries, the leisure services, the even the sort of roads and green space, that is really going to start suffering. So the money that is going into local authorities is going to be massively concentrated on a few people. Whereas the mantra in local government for the past few years has been doing more for less. What we're going to start seeing is less services for more. So people are going to have to pay more council tax, more additional charges and fees. And again, going back to the judicial reviews, how much people are going to tolerate that is an interesting question. We've seen since 2010 the public has voted for an austerity government, for a government that said that they would cut back on borrowing. Now we're starting to see the results of that. And interestingly, again on politics, very few people come into local politics to stop doing things. They want to do things, they want to make changes and make things better in their local area. So it'd be interesting to see how far the politicians are willing to take this. We did have Philip Hammond promising an easing of austerity, or hinting at an easing of austerity. But I think the landscape for that has changed. I mean, there is money promised to health, there is protection promised to education, and whereas he said there'd be a bit more flexibility on austerity, that was before the Treasury started predicting a 7.7% drop in GDP after Brexit. So that's £210 billion a year. And that's the figure the Treasury is now working to, which is, again, it's £1 trillion over 5 years. So for the Chancellor to start easing up on austerity, I can't see that happening, which means potentially a U-turn from Mr. Hammond, which is an interesting sort of central position on local government. And local government is always the one that takes the vast majority of the cuts. We're looking at getting through the budget this year, and there is a comprehensive spending review next year. But to my mind, that increasingly people are talking about that being 1 year only, so that doesn't give much, whilst it's politically the sensible thing to do due to Brexit and due to the fact that we're likely to have a change or to have a general election after Brexit, if not before. It doesn't give much forward planning time for local authorities. Social care green paper, there's no real commitment to change that we can see from that. At the moment, it's looking vastly like proposals for ISAs and a bit of fingers crossed, let's hope it all goes away. We're currently under the fair funding review, or the unfair funding review, as most people think it is. The business rates retention issue is still ongoing. The future for funding local government, nobody quite knows how local government is going to be funded after 2020, and that's a slightly precarious position for local authorities to be in. In addition to adult social care, which has been widely talked about as a huge problem, we've got children's services issues arising from the impact of baby P, changes to welfare, increase in child sexual exploitation and radicalisation. And I think a recent report outlined that there's now children coming into care purely down to poverty, which is something we haven't seen. I mean, it feels almost like we're going back to the days of the Victorian workhouse in some ways. So the impact of the austerity cuts thus far on all of public services seem to be pushing more pressures onto local authorities. And that goes for homelessness and rough sleeping as well. A lot of the welfare cuts are being held responsible for the rise in homelessness. The leisure and youth services cuts are having an impact on, or are believed to be having an impact on crime in London. And ultimately, looking forward, they're expected to be having an impact on the prison services in future. All of these things, they're counterfactual. It's slightly difficult to prove whether that's the cause or not. But we're starting to look at the austerity within local government as being a false economy. On top of that, we've got Brexit sucking up bandwidth. We've got staff turnover in local government at a senior levels quite high, which, not that I like to take delight in these things, but it's great for MJ and our jobs pages. But we've got a dwindling talent pool and an ageing workforce. And trying to attract people into a sector that is largely cutting is quite difficult. The easy savings have all gone. One chief executive described it to me last week as a tsunami. 2010, we had a tsunami, a big wave of cuts coming over the sector. It was all panic. And he said now, in the last couple of years, people have been putting out the deck chairs again, getting up the umbrellas and completely forgetting there's another one just behind it. And I think that's going to be the one that's coming. Feels like it's worse than what we've already seen. The Conservative counties are starting to get the message that they're not going to be bailed out from the centre because they are Conservative. I think that was a major learning point from Northamptonshire. And we've lost, as a sector, local government has lost about half the controllable budget that they have and about half of their staff. And they've got no capacity to stop doing things due to the amount of statutory services they have. And also, coming back to the issue of false economies and the difficulty of actually just looking after local people. So that was all the misery. It's all over now, and the support group will be available later. It's not all bad. Local government is incredibly good at turning things around. They are really working hard on recovery. They're working hard on prevention. And there's also something about Brexit and the potential for devolution after Brexit. There is the Brexit vote was very much against distant bureaucracies having control over people's lives. Actually, to bring all of the Brexit powers, all the European powers, down to central government would, in my view, be a mistake. Local government is there and ready to be the voice of local people and to take on some of the things that were previously done by Europe. And I think they are there to try and reconnect with communities. And I have every faith that in a few years' time we'll be standing here saying, well, wasn't that a really tough few years, but we've got through it. Thanks, Neil.